Well, we've covered a very wide range of topics. We've gone all the way from appropriate technology from Dennis. We've gone through much more global events in India. We've had some detailed food preparation from Jaya. We've had some metabolic biochemistry from Paul and some catering from Prue. So it's been a tremendously broad canvas we've covered today. I think that we had about 50-60 school children this morning, almost none of whom I suspect would have heard people with the experience of those on the panel. And it's sometimes very difficult to pick up sensible messages about food and nutrition from what one reads in the press, which isn't always as scientifically based as one would like. And I think this morning those school pupils had a chance to listen to 5 absolutely principled experts in their own area, which is a very rare opportunity for them. The rest of the audience were more experienced, and I think some of them would have heard some of that material before, and then this afternoon they had a chance to cross-examine and to quiz the panel, which again is an experience that, although they may have read it or listened to it on the radio or television, the chance to actually put their points of view to an experienced panel, I think, is a very great occasion. I'm not optimistic, I'm afraid. Food is very nice, and people enjoy eating and drinking, and I would be very surprised if voluntarily they chose to reduce that intake. Food historically is extraordinarily cheap. When I was growing up, the average British family would spend nearly 30% of disposable income on food. Now the average is between 10 and 12%, and for wealthy families even less. So although people get very upset about some of the recent prizes in food, on a historical basis it's still extraordinarily cheap. In addition to that, the variety that we now enjoy in Britain, thanks to an incredibly sophisticated food chain, means that we're tempted to sample all sorts of exciting, interesting, tasty things which we didn't have a chance to do 25 years ago. And I regret to say, I think myself included, we're all rather bad at resisting temptation. So I don't see a reduction of intake as helping. Now, as to whether we can get people to change their lifestyle so that this balance between exercise and diet is easy, I think I can see more hope there. I think people are deeply conscious now that an imbalance of only 50 calories a day over 10 years means several stone, but 50 calories is neither here nor there. It simply means walking for a bus or walking one extra bus stop or walking upstairs. I think I can see certain changes, certainly among young people. All of them are deeply conscious of the need to exercise one way or another. So I would be hopeful there, but I don't think we're going to see a big change in people's intake. I'm reasonably optimistic because world food production really has expanded extraordinarily well over the last 2 to 3 decades. And in fact, it has actually more than coped with the increase in the world's population. So those who today are seriously disadvantaged, on the whole it's for political reasons to do with warfare and economic embargoes rather than an absolute genuine shortage of basic protein and calories. For example, Cuba, which is not a rich country and has suffered terribly through the American trade embargo, actually everybody there is perfectly well fed. You don't see obesity, but you don't see hunger, you don't see poverty, because the government managed to arrange it that everybody had adequate calories and protein. So it can be done even on a fairly small island with very limited resources. It's much more a matter of where is the will to do it. I'm old enough just to have lived through the end of World War II, but certainly to have lived through food rationing in the years after it. And I remember the great joy when I was 8 years old when sweets were the final food to come off the ration. And the government rationed that up to the end because they were the least essential in our diet. And the whole thing was extremely carefully balanced to make sure that every man, woman and child in the country had an adequate intake. Now that's easy to do in wartime. Everybody accepts that there's going to have to be privations. Much, much more difficult to get it done in peacetime when people could vote out anybody who taxes or restricts access to the things that they enjoy chewing on. No, I don't think government's done enough. I really think that although you may not want to interfere with the free market very much, there are other ways to tweak the system. And certainly providing information to school children, to doctors, to nurses, has been very slow in coming. Nutrition and food science has always been well down people's priorities because there was enough of it. it's something that we enjoy doing, and therefore government should regard that in the same way as playing football. You know, it's just a thing that you do. Failing to recognise that actually food and nourishment and nutrition are actually really rather more important than that. Just as important as supplying a roof over your head and a warm house, and the government subsidises the elderly in several different ways. Food and nutrition are at least as important as that, and until recently nobody was prepared to take an initiative. And the other problem is that food has always fallen between different government departments. It wasn't the Department of Health because they look after sick people, it wasn't the National Health Service, it wasn't the Ministry of Agriculture, it wasn't the Department of Education. Everybody had a good reason for saying, no, son, it's somebody else's problem. And I think since the Food Standards Agency was invented with a clear job description, your job is to ensure safe, palatable, secure food, I think the culture has changed and a lot more is being done. I think it comes back to the point that I've just made, that it wasn't obvious which government department had the responsibility, and it was going to be very expensive and very difficult to do it, and nobody wanted to take on a difficult task. To persuade people to lower the level of obesity was clearly an absolute Herculean task, and Hercules himself might well have balked at it. So it is understandable that nobody was prepared to pick it up. But on that case, it's almost a waste of time having government reports to say, unless you're quite clear at the outset, we're going to monitor this every 3 or 5 years, and we're going to know when someone is falling down the job by not delivering. And that's not to underplay how very difficult it is. Absolutely. It's fairly well known that among the Indian community in Britain, that diabetes and obesity are really reaching remarkable levels. They have adapted to our diet to some extent in a way that's inconsistent with perhaps their genetic makeup, and there's a very serious problem there. In China, the obesity, which until recently was completely unknown, and this is partly, I believe, because in China when you only had one child, you could put all your resources into spoiling that one child. So all the ice cream and chocolate that would have gone between 2 or 3 children went into one child. So there's a lot of different factors contributing to it. But yes, it would be very, very sad if developing countries didn't learn by the mistakes that we have made. I don't think I can honestly say there's a central lesson, because I think we covered so many different topics. But I do still remain optimistic that we have the technology. Dennis described the use of spirulina. He described the way to provide pure water very cheaply. J. Henry described the way that technology can provide a low glycemic index loaf. There were a whole variety of markers that truly demonstrated how with political willpower and a not very large amount of money, you can engage school children in providing a better diet. So I think my overall message is simply actually that I remain optimistic. I think it's a great tribute to OIBC and its director that with a comparatively small amount of money it's been able to mount quite a few conferences like this. I think what the contribution it can make is that it has a network of people with influence and support. So for example, the director was able to call on a network of very seriously experienced people in the food chain to present today. Through his own network of contacts, he was able to provide an audience of people who were interested and wished to learn. And I think it's a very good catalyst to bring about change that even a small organisation can provide.